Hua. When Qingxuan's graceful figure appeared within the spirit array, a wave of astonished murmurs spread across the surrounding space. All eyes turned toward her, noticing that her body was seemingly wrapped in strands of spiritual light patterns, which coiled around her like serpents, restraining her and preventing any escape. However, those once blindingly bright spiritual light patterns were now significantly weakened. Behind Qingxian, there were also more than 10 other figures, all young girls of delicate beauty, clearly members of another team from the 10,000 Phoenixes Spiritual Academy. At this moment, they too were trapped within the spirit array. Eyes gathered on Qingxian, and when they saw the considerably weakened spiritual light patterns on her body, a sudden sense of shock surged within them. Instantly, their gazes shifted to Mu Chen. It was now clear to everyone what Mu Chen's plan was. He had intentionally used every means at his disposal to force Xiao Huang into activating the full power of the spirit array against him. For in this spirit array, not only was Mu Chen trapped, but so were Qingxian and her team. Clearly, if Xiao Huang intended to restrain Qingxian, it would require immense effort. Yet now, this power was being used to deal with Mu Chen. This distraction was bound to weaken the restraints on Qingxian, making her eventual escape inevitable. And who was Qingxian? Once ranked first on the leaderboard, now third. Her strength was such that even Jixin, who was currently ranked first, would never dare underestimate her. The reason she was trapped now was largely because Xiao Huang had used her teammates to delay her. Otherwise, no one would believe that Xiao Huang alone could handle Qingxian. Therefore, once Qingxian broke free from the array, Xiao Huang's situation would undoubtedly turn tragic. Clearly, Mu Chen had been scheming this from the very beginning. Bastard! Xiao Huang's once indifferent expression was now overtaken by a flash of anger and unease. Mu Chen's move was ruthless, almost instantly throwing him off balance. He could clearly feel the icy glare coming from Qingxuan's beautiful eyes. Evidently, she harbored no small amount of hatred for him. Xiao Huang glared fiercely at Mu Chen, then swiftly changed his seal technique, hastily attempting to use the power of the Binding Heaven array to trap Qingxian again. After all, compared to her, Mu Chen was clearly easier to deal with. However, the spiritual energy within the array was mostly tied up by the spiritual formations Mu Chen had laid. Even though those formations were on the verge of collapse, they couldn't be broken through instantly. As Xiao Huang hurriedly tried to manipulate the spiritual energy, Qingxian shot him an icy glance. Then, a dazzling golden light began to radiate from her graceful figure. Within her body, a clear phoenix cry echoed through the skies. Under the glow of the golden light, the serpent-like patterns of spiritual light that had bound her began to rapidly dissolve. Seeing this, Xiao Huang's face turned grim, and he hastily altered his seal technique, causing the spiritual energy trapped within the array to violently surge. He needed to activate the array's power once more. Boom, boom. But Mu Chen, who had painstakingly split the power of the Binding Heaven array to trap Xiao Huang, wasn't about to let him easily consolidate his strength. He sneered coldly and urged his own formations to delay as much time as possible. Once Qingxian and her team broke free, all his concerns would be gone, and he would no longer have to worry about Xiao Huang using this as leverage. Both were channeling their spiritual energy, and for a moment, a stalemate ensued. Amidst this deadlock, Xiao Huang's expression grew increasingly grim. Xiao King. As Qingxuan's spiritual light patterns thinned further, Xiao Huang could no longer hold back and shouted in a low voice. Upon hearing this, the cold-faced Xiao King by his side immediately flashed a cold gleam in his eyes. He quickly clenched his fist, and in an instant, a fiery red bullhorn bow appeared in his hand. The bowstring was drawn to its limit, and the arrowhead locked onto Mu Chen. Flames surged from the tip, emitting an intensely sharp and scorching spiritual energy fluctuation, as if it could tear apart space itself. Whoosh! However, before Xiao King could draw the bow and release the arrow, a sharp and unmatched sword light shot into the sky. A sword shadow condensed from the light and descended fiercely upon Xiao King. The shadow of the sword slashed down, splitting even the air in two. The unstoppable sharpness of the strike caused everyone's expression to change drastically. Xiao Qing's pupils contracted slightly. He quickly retreated, his arrow shifting sideways. With a flick of his finger, a blazing red arrow shot out, roaring through the air, its surrounding spiritual energy violently twisting and shattering the air. Boom! The sword shadow and the arrow collided fiercely, unleashing a violent shockwave. The surrounding mountains trembled, on the verge of collapse, while deep cracks were torn into the ground by the released sword chi. The two attacks slowly dissipated, but Xiao Qing's face darkened as he raised his head. He gazed at the beautiful young girl floating in midair not far ahead. She held a long sword shimmering with ripples, her icy eyes locking onto him with cold intent. "The rules earlier didn't allow you to make a move," Luo Li said, staring at Xiao Qing with a cold voice. "Whether I make a move or not is none of your business," Xiao Qing sneered, his eyes full of hostility as he glared at Luo Li. Although her beauty was captivating, even most men would be moved by her. He remained unmoved. His hand tightened around the fiery red ox-horn bow. Flames blazed along its body, emitting intense spiritual energy fluctuations. Clearly, this bow was also a powerful spirit artifact. Luo Li glanced at him faintly, but didn't speak another word. She slowly lifted the Luo god's sword in her hand, and a powerful wave of spiritual energy began to surge from it. Water-like patterns appeared on the sword, with the sword's tip gathering a deadly sword chi, extending and retracting unpredictably. Everyone could feel the piercing aura emanating from Luo Li. Many experts' expressions changed, their eyes full of uncertainty as they stared at her. From her, they sensed a dangerous presence. Xiao Qing's face twitched as his grip on the fiery giant bow tightened, the veins on his arm pulsing. He stared at Luo Li, but in the end, he didn't strike, as he too sensed the threat from her. The young girl before him wasn't just a beauty. Her strength was equally terrifying. "No wonder she's the Luo King," Wu Ling said from a distant peak, his usually calm face showing a hint of admiration. Even he felt a slight, tingling sensation on his skin from the sharp sword chi that was quietly drifting through the air. "She's really impressive," Wu Yingying muttered, pouting slightly. Although she was also prideful, she couldn't help but feel a bit less confident when facing someone as exceptional as Luo Li. Heh, at the end of the spirit road, if she hadn't insisted on dealing with Jixin, the spirit crown might not have gone to Wen Qingxian, Wu Ling chuckled, adding, "She's an extraordinary girl. Someone like her will surely shine in the great thousand worlds in the future." As for Mu Chun, well, he's quite lucky. Even Wu Ling, with his nature, couldn't help but sigh. After all, girls like Luo Li and Wen Qingxian were truly exceptional. Doesn't swan meat always get eaten by toads? Wu Yingying scoffed, unimpressed, disparaging Mu Chun. "Mu Chen's not a toad." Wu Ling smiled faintly, gazing at the tall figure in the spiritual array. He murmured, "Anyone whom Jixin fears can't be ordinary." Heh, this is interesting. These two opposing figures are facing off once more. I wonder, who will laugh last this time? "Jixin is no easy opponent," Wu Ling said, his brow furrowing. His usually handsome face showed an unusual seriousness and wariness. Boom, boom. The overwhelming spiritual energy rampaged within the spiritual array like a storm. The small spiritual arrays were being struck with more and more cracks. These arrays weren't of high grade, so they couldn't withstand such violent spiritual energy for long. Mu Chen knew this all too well. His plan was simple, to stall for as much time as possible, allowing Wen Qingxian and the others to escape the restraints. "Break for me." Xiao Qing's face twisted with a ferocious expression. His hand formed a new seal, and he roared, his voice like thunder. The violent spiritual energy surged like a fierce tiger descending the mountain, unstoppable. With a resounding boom, the small spiritual arrays were forcibly shattered. In an instant, vast and overwhelming spiritual energy, like an ocean, swept outward, only to converge once more. Boom, boom. Within the spiritual array, the storm of spiritual energy raged once again. The terrifying power gathered together, and even Mu Chen's expression tightened. A level 5 combined spiritual array was no easy challenge. Fortunately, Mu Chen had already achieved his goal. He looked up to see Wen Qingxian, her cold face lit by the glow of her jade hand reaching for the golden war spear. With a firm stomp, golden light engulfed her, and the spiritual energy patterns on her body were completely dissolved. As the spiritual energy patterns vanished, Wen Qingxuan's energy surged once more. She swiftly extended her jade hand, striking like lightning at the women behind her, Pinner, Luo, and others. Bang! Bang! The fierce winds struck their bodies, shattering the light patterns on them, and the force sent them flying out of the spiritual array's boundary. Damn it! Xiao Huang's face darkened with rage. He glared at Mu Chen, fury flashing in his eyes. With a wave of his sleeve, the gathered spiritual energy transformed into several enormous spirit pythons, charging at Mu Chen like lightning. Since Wen Qingxian had escaped, he would use Mu Chen as leverage. Mu Chen's gaze sharpened as Xiao Huang changed targets. His hand clenched, and the dragon-devouring demonic spear appeared. With a violent thrust, it soared, transforming into a demonic dragon, clashing with the spirit pythons. Boom! Boom! The terrifying spiritual energy unleashed like a storm, and the demonic dragon was sent flying back toward Mu Chen. Mu Chen reached out, grabbing the spear. His body trembled as he was thrust back. Xiao Huang's fury had summoned the full force of the binding heaven array, and despite his strength, Mu Chen was now at a disadvantage. As Mu Chen was pushed back, a faint fragrance surrounded him, and he felt a soft jade hand press against his back, countering the impact. He turned his head to see Wen Qingxuan's stunning face. He shrugged helplessly. It seems something's wrong. I came to save the damsel in distress, but now the roles are reversed? Wen Qingxuan's previously cold expression softened into a smile. She shot him a playful glare, though it lacked her usual pride, instead showing a hint of gentleness. After a moment, her face flushed slightly, and she spoke in a soft voice, "Thanks, this time." Mu Chen was momentarily stunned. It was the first time he had heard Wen Qingxian speak to him so gently. In the past, she had always carried herself like a proud phoenix, her eyes filled with an unyielding arrogance, especially when dealing with men. Her strength had always been apparent. Now, faced with her beauty, Mu Chen felt a little uncomfortable. But his discomfort didn't last long. Soon, Wen Qingxuan's proud smile returned, and she glanced at him. "But you're really pathetic. You come to save the day with these weak skills. Don't get yourself caught in the process." Mu Chen's lips twitched. He shot her a glare, nearly tempted to trap her in a formation again. Wen Qingxian, noticing his glare, smiled even more brightly. Her gaze then shifted to the distant Xiao Huang, whose face had darkened, the smile on her face fading and replaced with a chilling cold. Xiao Huang shuddered at the sight of her icy expression. Outside the spiritual array, others also looked at Xiao Huang with sympathy. They could feel the fury hidden beneath Wen Qingxuan's cold beauty. "Mu Chen, let me handle the rest," Wen Qingxian said softly. Mu Chen met her gaze. He could see the fire burning in her eyes. He shook his head. "This array is tricky. You're not good at breaking arrays, and even if you do, it will drain you greatly. Save your strength for the bigger problems ahead." Xiao Huang and the others were indeed powerful, but they had never dared to lay a hand on Wen Qingxian. Yet, now they actually took action. If there wasn't something odd about this situation, Mu Chen wouldn't believe it. There was hidden meaning behind Mu Chen's words, which made Wen Qingxuan's heart stir. However, her delicate, crescent-shaped eyebrows furrowed slightly, and her red lips parted. Although Mu Chen was also a spiritual array master, she knew very well how powerful Xiao Huang's binding heaven array was. Facing such a formation, not to mention Mu Chen, even she would need to pay a price to break it. Therefore, it was clear that breaking this formidable array would be no easy task for Mu Chen. If he made a mistake, it would be quite embarrassing. Although Wen Qingxian usually didn't care about Mu Chen's pride, with so many eyes watching them now, she didn't want to see him embarrassed. "It's rare that you actually care about my face." Mu Chen seemed to have seen the thought in Wen Qingxuan's eyes. He raised his brows slightly, then smiled, looking toward Xiao Huang in the distance. "But don't worry. Since I've said this, I'm confident. This binding heaven array may not be weak, But to trap me, he probably doesn't have that qualification. As Mu Chen spoke, a smile appeared on his face, not smug, but confident. The smile was undoubtedly charming. I don't care if you die. When Qingxian glanced at Mu Chen's handsome face, and her beautiful eyes flickered. When Mu Chen looked at her, she quickly shifted her gaze. With a slight pout of her red lips, she said, "You men always love to show off. All right, since you came all the way to help, I won't argue with you. Hurry up and break the array." "I can't wait to beat that guy up." When Qingxian waved her jade hand, Mu Chen smiled upon hearing this, saying nothing further. He slowly stepped forward, his increasingly cold and sharp gaze locking onto Xiao Huang. Seeing Mu Chen's actions, Xiao Huang understood what he was about to do. A flicker of anger passed through his eyes, and he sneered, "What? Someone's supporting you now, giving you a bit of confidence, huh?" "Just eyeing those 20,000 points," Mu Chen replied with a smile. "Hope you've got the ability to take them." Xiao Huang glanced at Wen Qingxian, whose frosty expression showed a hint of caution in his eyes. "You two should work together. With just you, breaking the array is a dream." Mu Chen looked at him with a half-smile. "Afraid? Why say such things to provoke us? But rest assured, I alone am enough to break the array." "Arrogant. Now I really want to see what makes you so confident to say such things." Xiao Huang's eyes flashed with a cold, gleeful light. The situation was now completely against them. If Mu Chen and Wen Qingxian teamed up, even his binding heaven array would be useless. Fortunately, this arrogant guy actually dared to boast so much. If they could capture Mu Chen, the situation would shift back in their favor. Mu Chen smiled. He knew exactly what Xiao Huang was thinking, but he didn't say much more. His palms slowly clenched, and black lightning suddenly erupted from his body, crackling and swirling around him. An overwhelming surge of power radiated from Mu Chen's body at that moment. The black lightning grew more concentrated, eventually flowing around his body like molten lightning. It made Mu Chen appear like a thunder god standing amid a storm, exuding an unmatched aura. Xiao Huang could also feel the intense energy emanating from Mu Chen's body. His gaze sharpened, no longer daring to delay. He quickly changed his seal technique, and the vast spiritual energy within the binding heaven array began to roar. Massive spirit pythons formed again, hissing and slithering as they locked onto Mu Chen with cold eyes. Mu Chen looked up, then stepped forward, his foot landing heavily on the ground. Boom! As his foot hit the ground, spiderweb-like cracks spread rapidly, and the mountain itself seemed to tremble under the heavy force. Boom! The ground trembled as Mu Chen's figure suddenly darted forward like a shadow, black lightning flashing wildly around him. As Mu Chen successfully overcame the spiritual energy tribulation, the spiritual energy within his body surged exponentially. With spiritual energy complementing his physical strength, the power he unleashed could rival that of a first-level divine soul tribulation expert. Mu Chen pushed his power to the limit, not attacking recklessly, but instead directly charging at a specific part of the spiritual array. This was the direction he had previously sensed, one of the suspected central points of the three spiritual arrays. As a spiritual array master, Mu Chen knew well that forcibly breaking an array was the most foolish approach. Only by locating the array's center could it be easily dismantled. "You think you can break my center? Dream on." Xiao Huang's eyes darkened as he sneered coldly. With a flick of his sleeve, dozens of massive spirit pythons, each over 100 meters long, tore through the air and relentlessly swept towards Mu Chen. Boom! Mu Chen struck with a punch, releasing black lightning accompanied by overwhelming spiritual energy, shattering the air and landing a powerful blow on the spirit pythons' bodies. Bang! Bang! The lightning roared past, and several spirit pythons shattered into pieces. However, the spiritual energy quickly recombined, reforming the pythons as if they were brand new, and they charged forward once more. Boom! The lightning and pythons clashed, sending shockwaves that shook the entire mountain, causing it to tremble violently. When Qingxian watched the exchange with furrowed brows, Xiao Huang could command all the spiritual energy in the binding heaven array, so he wasn't afraid of a war of attrition. But why did Mu Chen continue to face it head-on? Prolonging the battle would only harm him in the long run. Xiao Huang also observed Mu Chen smashing the spirit pythons apart, but he wasn't in a rush. A sneer appeared deep in his eyes as he knew that if this continued, Mu Chen would eventually be defeated. Since you're enjoying yourself so much, let's raise the difficulty. Xiao Huang sneered, snapping his fingers. Immediately, spiritual energy from the direction gathered and transformed into dozens of spirit pythons, their massive tails crashing down like meteorites. Boom! Mu Chen didn't retreat. He punched with all his might, striking the dozen or so spirit pythons. A terrifying wave of spiritual energy exploded, sending him flying back, and his surrounding spiritual energy began to show signs of disruption. Outside the array, Su Huang and the others stiffened. You're so unaware of your limits. Xiao Huang's cold grin spread across his face. Whoosh! However, before his smile could linger, his pupils suddenly contracted as he saw Mu Chen's body suddenly change direction mid-flight, heading straight for the west side of the array. There, the air shimmered with spiritual light, and array runes were hidden within the brilliance. That direction seemed inconspicuous, but Xiao Huang's expression turned instantly grim, and a look of horror appeared in his eyes, because only he knew that the true center of the array was located there. He hadn't expected that Mu Chen had already detected it. Mu Chen's previous aggressive attacks in other directions were all intended to lower his guard. Whoosh! As Xiao Huang's expression changed, he quickly activated the array's power, and the spirit pythons once again rushed out to chase Mu Chen. But Mu Chen, seizing the initiative, arrived at the spot beneath the flashing spiritual light runes first. He raised his hands and summoned a pillar of fierce, malevolent light from the top of his head, which shot straight into the sky. A giant demonic pillar materialized, and Mu Chen embraced it with both hands without hesitation, then swung it down into the dazzling array light. Xiao Huang's face turned pale. As the demonic pillar descended, Mu Chen's calm voice followed the rush of wind, reaching Xiao Huang's ears. If you're still eating the same loss twice, you really are unbelievably foolish. Sorry, looks like those 20,000 points are mine to claim. Boom. The demonic pillar, carrying an immense wave of malevolent energy, crashed down heavily upon the array of spiritual light runes. Many people had their mouths slightly open, their eyes somewhat dazed as they stared at the tall, slender figure. For a moment, it seemed as if they were questioning whether they had misheard. Mu Chen not only intended to face 3 opponents alone, but also claimed that he would defeat them with a single move. Some couldn't help but twitch their mouths. If it weren't for the current situation, they might have burst out laughing. Mu Chen's words were truly arrogant. The 3 in front of him were far from ordinary. They were the top 16 experts on the ranking list, and although their rankings were lower, their strength was such that even those who had passed the first-level Divine Soul Tribulation would treat them with extreme caution. Perhaps Emocio and the others hadn't yet passed the second-level Divine Soul Tribulation, but they were certainly beginning to approach it. A regular first-level Divine Soul Tribulation expert was no match for them. After witnessing Mu Chen's skill in breaking arrays earlier, no one dared to underestimate him. Yet, despite this, no one truly believed that he could take on 3 well-known experts from the rankings with just his own strength. This guy. Wu Yingying frowned deeply, her gaze fixed on Mu Chen's figure. What is he trying to do? Because he wants to give Ji Xian a taste of his own medicine, Wu Ling said with a faint smile. Ji Xian sent people to test him, so now he wants to turn Ji Xian's test into a slap, hitting him hard. Not long ago, Ji Xian defeated 3 renowned experts by himself. He knocked them out of the top 16 and made his name resound throughout the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition. Now Mu Chen is doing the same, but even more ruthlessly. A single move challenge? But isn't that too risky? Wu Yingying withdrew the arrogance from her words. After all, she knew Mu Chen somewhat well. Given his nature, he shouldn't be acting impulsively or irrationally. You should know him well enough. This guy never acts without reason. Wu Ling's eyes shimmered with a spark of light. He stared at Mu Chen's figure, smiling slightly. So, he must be somewhat confident. I'm curious. How is he going to use the power of spiritual energy tribulation to do this? Could it be that he's relying on a spiritual array? But to deal with 3 experts who've reached the 2nd level Divine Soul Tribulation, he would need at least a level 5 combined spiritual array like the Binding Heaven array. Will Emoshio and the others give him that time? Wu Yingying furrowed her brows, feeling a bit doubtful in her heart. Amidst the loud murmurs, Emoshio and his companions were also slightly stunned. They exchanged a glance, and there was an absurd look in their eyes. A person whose strength was barely at the spiritual energy tribulation level claimed he would face them alone. Moreover, judging by his demeanor, it seemed he planned to defeat them with a single move. Although they knew Mu Chen's strength was likely greater than he had shown, to defeat all 3 of them with one move made them laugh in anger. Did this Mu Chen really think he was Jixin? Captain Mu Chen sure is full of himself, Emoshio sneered, staring at Mu Chen. Looks like you've heard about Jixin's past feats, but if you think you can prove you're equally qualified by using the same method, I think you've got the wrong target. A smile appeared on Mu Chen's calm and handsome face. He replied, "Since when has Jixin been above me? The lessons he received from me weren't few. The battles in the Spirit Road were just a trial. If you continue to rely on their outcomes for your confidence, you'll be very disappointed," Emoshio said with a cold smile. Hearing this, Mu Chen slightly nodded in agreement, then smiled. "Please, pass this message to Jixin." Emoshio's face twitched, his eyes darkening. He exchanged a glance with the other 2, and then, all 3 of them took a step forward. 3 immense waves of spiritual energy immediately surged out from their bodies like a storm. Boom, boom. The spiritual energy swept through, light flashing. Even the leaders of the strong teams, facing the 1st level Divine Soul Tribulation, had expressions filled with caution. Indeed, no one in the top 16 ranking list could be considered weak. Behind Mu Chen, Su Huang, and the others wore grave expressions as well. They hadn't expected Mu Chen to plan to face 3 powerful opponents by himself. While they were somewhat concerned, there was nothing they could do at this point except to watch silently. Luo Li glanced at Mu Chen's back but said nothing. Due to her trust in him, she also knew that Mu Chen wouldn't act recklessly. "Hey, are you sure about this?" Wen Qingxian couldn't help but ask. Although she had witnessed the power of Mu Chen's combined spiritual array in the Wood Divine Hall ruins, the situation now was different. Clearly, the enemy wouldn't give him the time to prepare. "Didn't I tell you last time not to ask that kind of question casually?" Mu Chen tilted his head slightly and smiled at Wen Qingxian. A flush appeared on Wan Qingxuan's fair, delicate face. She shot Mu Chen a sharp look. This guy, even at such a critical moment, still had the nerve to joke with her. "Don't worry," Mu Chen said softly, taking a deep breath. A faint sharpness appeared on his handsome face. "Since someone wants to test whether I can pose a threat to him, I certainly won't disappoint him." Wen Qingxian nodded lightly and didn't say more. She knew about the feud between Mu Chen and Jixin, and it seemed almost impossible to mediate. If, in the past, she might have chosen to remain neutral if they were in opposition, the fact that Mu Chen had traveled such a long distance to help her had made her regard him as a friend. So, when it came to choosing between them, her loyalty naturally leaned toward Mu Chen. Even though she understood that Jixin was a tough opponent, Wen Qingxian was unbothered. Proud and confident, she didn't think she was weaker than Jixin. "Let's see what you can do. As for the alliance of academies, don't worry. They won't escape," Wen Qingxian said, her beautiful eyes glancing indifferently at Xiao Huang and Xiao Qing, who were not far away. Xiao Huang and Xiao Qing, who were aware of their gaze, both wore faint, cold smiles, as if watching a show. They knew very well the strength of Emoshio and his companions. If the 2 of them teamed up, they might have some chance of victory, but they would never claim that they could defeat them in one strike, which would be almost ignorant. Mu Chen nodded slightly. With Luo Li and Wen Qingxian here, even if Xiao Huang and Xiao Qing weren't weak, Mu Chen didn't think they could cause much trouble for the 2 women. He then raised his head, his gaze cold and distant, locking onto Emoshio and his companions. At that moment, Emoshio and his companions were also staring at Mu Chen, their expressions not looking good. "It seems that Captain Mu Chen is really determined today." Emoshio's deep voice echoed like thunder amidst the vast spiritual energy, resonating through the heavens and earth. "Since you're so confident, We'll truly see if your abilities match your words. Emoshio's tone became sharper, and the spiritual energy surrounding him grew even more violent, pressing down on the air with a low explosive sound. The entire area seemed filled with the overwhelming pressure brought by the massive spiritual energy. Some people quietly retreated, sensing that the battle about to erupt would be incredibly intense. The overwhelming spiritual energy surged like the sea, and Emoshio's group's eyes gradually grew colder. Captain Mu Chun, it's your turn to make a move. We're waiting. But let me make it clear first, we know you're a spiritual array master. So if you think we'll just foolishly wait while you set up your spiritual array, that won't be happening. Mu Chen gazed at the massive spiritual energy surrounding the three, his black eyes flashing briefly. The spiritual energy surging around them was several times stronger than that of typical first-level Divine Soul Tribulation experts. Clearly, they were nearing the second-level Divine Soul Tribulation. If given more time, they would likely break through. The strength of each of them was not inferior to Blood Tiandu, whom he had encountered in the Wood Divine Hall ruins. In fact, they might even be a bit stronger. However, now, compared to when he was in the Wood Divine Temple ruins, he has grown significantly stronger. Mu Chun took a deep breath, his eyes slowly closing, and his hands gently came together, quietly forming a slightly awkward but exceptionally profound seal technique. As he completed the seal, a faint green glow began to emanate from his palms. Buzzing. A series of enormous green circles, about 1,000 feet wide, began to spread out. As these green circles expanded, no one noticed that the thick green trees in the mountain were quietly flickering with green light. This is Wood God energy. A vast green ripple spread out from Mu Chen's center, almost covering the entire lush mountain range. Many onlookers were surprised, but soon puzzled, as they didn't sense any particularly strong spiritual energy fluctuations from the green ripples. Emoshio and his two companions, however, looked on with calm expressions, though their bodies had subtly tensed. As people who had made it to the top 16 rankings, they were certainly not brainless. Although they were somewhat puzzled by the scene, it was precisely this uncertainty that made them wary, because no one knew what Mu Chun was preparing to do to counter them. Mu Chun hovered in midair, his eyes slightly closed. Within the green light, his hands slowly but resolutely shifted through one ancient and profound seal after another. With every change in the seals, the green ripples that spread out grew brighter. Buzzing. At some point, people started to feel a faint vibration coming from the mountain range. On a distant peak, a martial spiritual expert suddenly moved. A flash of surprise crossed his eyes as he slowly looked down at the dense forest within the mountain range. This fluctuation. Boom boom. The vibrating sound grew more urgent, and soon everyone could perceive it. Then they saw the lush forest within the mountain range, suddenly emanating a green light that surged outward. When the green light spread across the sky, everyone's expression changed dramatically because they sensed an extremely powerful spiritual energy fluctuation from it. Moreover, the spiritual energy within it was full of vitality, far more alive than ordinary spiritual energy, giving it an almost sentient quality. Where did this spiritual energy come from? Someone couldn't help but exclaim. They had not felt the flow of spiritual energy in the air. But now, where did all this vast spiritual energy come from? Wait, the source of this spiritual energy seems to be those trees. Someone with sharp senses noticed the origin of the energy. When these words were spoken, they undoubtedly caused a stir among everyone. While everyone knew that all things in nature possessed spiritual essence, even trees accumulated spiritual energy over long periods of time. With varying strengths, it was incredibly difficult to extract this energy. Only those who had reached the supreme stage could do so. However, now, this was happening with Mu Chun, who was only at the spiritual energy tribulation stage. The disturbance was so intense it left them all unsettled. Luo Li and Wen Qingxian also showed surprise on their faces at this moment, clearly having never seen Mu Chen perform such a technique. After a brief moment of astonishment, Luo Li quietly let out a breath, while Wen Qingxian looked at Mu Chen's back with a peculiar gleam in her eyes. This young man seemed to bring surprises each time they met. Emoshio and his two companions also felt the calmness on their faces slowly dissipate. Their expressions changed slightly as they stared at the green light rising from the endless forest, their eyes filled with uncertainty. Chen ignored the gazes and vibrations from the outside world. His eyes remained closed, his hands slowly moving through the seal techniques. A faint cold sweat appeared on his forehead, and his face grew a little pale. Wood God energy is a true divine art. Such a level of divine technique is something even some supreme experts cannot possess. The faint flashes of lightning began to flicker across Chen's body. Clearly, he had quietly activated his thunder god body, which made it easier for him to unleash the wood god art. The tremors in the Lin Hai below became more pronounced. Chen's eyes suddenly snapped open, and within his black pupils, a green light surged. Then, he rapidly changed his hand seals, and a low voice echoed within his mind. Would God art transform wood into spirit? Chen's palm print suddenly slammed downward toward the lush Lin Hai below. It was as though an invisible ripple spread out from his palm print, and even the air shimmered with faint ripples. Buzz. Within the dense Lin Hai, a brilliant green light suddenly erupted, and the earth trembled with increasing intensity. Then, the onlookers' pupils shrank in shock as they saw the massive trees, whose originally emerald leaves, rapidly turned with astonishing speed to a sickly yellow. The yellowing spread quickly from a central point, rapidly radiating outward in layers. In just a few dozen breaths, every tree within a range of several thousand meters had withered and turned yellow, as though all their spiritual energy had been drained. When these trees reached the peak of their withering, they suddenly exploded, turning into dust that scattered in the air. Boom, boom. The deep sounds echoed like firecrackers, crackling continuously as the trees in the Lin Hai exploded into dust. Within a short time, the once verdant forest was reduced to barren land, with thick wood dust scattered across the ground. Everyone stared in shock at the scene, their faces filled with disbelief at the sheer dominance of this technique. As their gazes shifted upward, they saw that above the now barren mountains, the green spiritual energy surged like an ocean, roaring with life. The immense spiritual energy, all drawn from the shattered trees, was so powerful that even some experts in the first-level divine soul tribulation felt their scalps tingling in awe. Chen slowly descended, landing atop the rolling sea of spiritual energy. He looked ahead, and on the mountain peak, Xiao and the others had faintly appeared with a tinge of green in their expressions. Their slightly twitching brows revealed their inner shock. The terrifying scene Chen had created had clearly shaken them. The three of them exchanged serious glances, no longer daring to underestimate him. They could feel the immense pressure coming toward them, a pressure so overwhelming that they felt their bodies unable to move. "Now, it's your turn, gentlemen," Chen said with a faint smile as he extended his long finger and gently pointed into the air. "Spirit Sea Impact." His soft voice echoed, but as the final word left his lips, the youth's dark eyes turned sharp like a blade, sending a chill to the heart. Boom! The surging spirit sea violently shook, and then it roared upward, sweeping forth like a massive, ferocious tidal wave. An unstoppable flood descending from the heavens, heading straight for Xiao and the others, as though the weight of Mount Tai itself was pressing down on them. As the spirit sea surged through the space, some distortion appeared in the air, and shadows cloaked the surroundings, plunging the world into darkness. Everyone immediately retreated at full speed, afraid of being caught in the wake of the spirit sea. Even experts in the first-level divine soul tribulation would be crushed into paste in an instant by that impact. The faces of Xiao and his companions became grim. They exchanged a glance before they simultaneously shouted, and powerful spiritual energy erupted from their bodies. At this moment, none of them dared to hold back any longer. What they had once thought was Chen's arrogance in attempting to face three opponents was long gone from their minds. Only now did they truly understand why even a monstrous talent like Xian regarded this young man as a true threat. Fire God art, Flame Dragon burned the heavens. Xiao took the lead, his hand seals changing as he bellowed. Vajra Divine Palm. A burst of golden light erupted from Qianing's body, causing his figure to expand several times in size. The golden light shimmered, resembling a towering Vajra Buddha. His expression was stern as he struck out with his palm, sending a massive golden light palm imprint roaring forward. Lu God's art. The frail Lu Chen also shouted in a low voice. As green light spread, a giant willow tree appeared behind him, its branches extending wide as if to shield the heavens and block the sun, exuding immense power. At this moment, the three of them unleashed their trump cards, clearly aware that if they held back now, the only word to describe the outcome would be tragic. The spiritual energy in the heavens and earth surged, and everyone was stunned by the overwhelming display. Boom! Under the gaze of countless eyes, the verdant spirit sea surged forward like a flood, carrying with it a terrifying pressure of spiritual energy, directly crashing down. Under such overwhelming spiritual power, any attack seemed insignificant in comparison. Boom! The spirit sea collided with Emotio and the other's astonishing attacks, resulting in a powerful impact. Boom! 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 In the instant of the collision, a thunderous roar reverberated across the area, clearly audible within a 100-mile radius. All eyes were locked on the point of impact, where the spiritual energy shockwave swept out like a storm. Bang! Bang! Bang!